Hi everybody, I am actually here. I was just in the middle of trying to get some stuff done over on my other monitor, which is being a little bit weird at the moment. Anyway, not quite sure what's going on there. Probably because I've been away and my computer has been sitting here talking to itself all morning. That's a bit better, I think. Talking to itself all morning when it should have been actually just having a rest. Anyway, so how are you all, my wonderful people? Are you ready to listen to another story? I hope so. I like reading stories to you. I'm just unlocking my little iPad mini. First generation. Pretty cool. Now, this is not an exceptionally large number of chapters in this book, so the chapters are actually quite long. Hi, I'm Jev, and I read old-fashioned stories, and I am here to read them to you today. And I shall carry on with reading the book that I have been reading for last time, and it is a book called The Treasure of the Isle of Mist, which sounds like an intriguing name. The actual name is one of the nicknames for the Isle of Skye, which is off the northwest coast of Scotland. Oh, so now my little computer is going to do its thing. And yes, the picture that's up there at the moment is the wrong picture for this book. And I had been hoping to put the right picture for this book up there. Yeah, that's the way things go sometimes. I had to go down to Auckland and come back and do some other things along the way to do with our other business. And it's been keeping me rather busy. So anyway, welcome here. Nice to have you here. Good to have you here. I shall close this so it doesn't distract me. And I shall... What else am I trying to do over here? There's something else I'm trying to do over here. I've got most of the other things shut. Zoom needs to actually do as it's told and shut so that I can get on with streaming and not having it using up my resources. That's part of the problem. We are currently reading the book called The Treasure of the Isle of Mist by W. Tarn, as written up above in the overlay here, if you're watching this on Twitch. He only wrote one children's book, and it was for his teenage daughter, whose teenage daughter's name was Otta, O-T-T-A. The man himself was an historian, I think, from what I understand, and wrote quite a number of books about Greek history and Greek philosophy. That seems to be his sort of thing. Come on, you need to go to the next screen. And with him writing that, he was very interested in what people from the Greek period of history said about themselves and how they viewed the world and all that sort of thing. In fact, he's up until relatively recently, the things that he had written were still referred to quite often in other historic references. And one of the things that he did, oh, it's being funny. The one thing that he did that was outside of his normal things was he actually wrote this story for his daughter. Why that's interesting is because his daughter then went on and became famous for collecting together fairy stories from the part of Scotland that she comes from, which is the northwest of Scotland. And they were fairy stories that were passed on by word of mouth, oral tradition stories. And she actually... at the time when she did it, it was not something that you could study at university. She had no backing for doing it or anything like that. And yet she decided she was interested enough in this sort of thing that she went ahead, listened to stories that other people had grown up with hearing. She had grown up with her mother telling her local stories, which I think is where it partly started from, and this story that we're going to be reading. And she's most famous for writing these 4 or 5 books of Scottish fairy stories from oral tradition, which is where people tell the stories rather than reading them from a book. And she gathered up these very, very, very famous now in some ways, stories that have actually been used as a basis of some other stories and movies even. So you never know, this story might have actually had a part to play in that. No, that's another thing that's trying to do something in the background. I don't know why. I think I really just need to restart my computer sometime. And anyway, we will carry on. We will actually do some reading instead of talking. And I hope you've brought your water or something to stay hydrated with, something to snack on, and you have somewhere nice and comfortable to sit or lie while you are listening to today's story. And that, now it's going to let me, yes. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to see over the top of a set of headphones, which shouldn't be on my desk. Just a moment. What was that?
Are you reading?
I'm reading. Yeah. Right, so we are reading The Treasure of the Isle of Mist by W.W. Tarn, and we are reading chapter 4, which is called The Urchin Vanishes. To most people there is some corner of the earth which means more than all others, and there are 2 or 3 in the world whose holy place is the old house on the sea loch, which the student's humbler neighbours called the Big House. An old square building of grey stone that matches the grey sky and the grey sea, it has small claims to beauty. It was built in the days of blank windows, and every wind in the island meets and screams round the battered iron balustrade which leads up its steps to the door, and strives to tear down the tendrils of ivy that cling to the east front. To the south front, lashed by the full Atlantic gales, not even ivy can cling. Only a few twisted elders and stunted planes grow there, plane trees, and take the first force of the winter wind. But the old lawn to the north bursts in summer into a cloud of white marguerites, they're a type of daisy, whose ethereal beauty at sunset is like the ghosts of the dreams that haunt the place. For to some of us, the old house is full of dreams that cling to the dark passages and uneven floors, and play in and out of the little windows that are still propped open with wood, as they were 100 years ago. Dreams of the bright lights and the bright voices that greeted us, coming in out of the blinding rain. Dreams of the dance and the song, songs of old lost causes from which all bitterness has died away, leaving today nothing but beauty behind them. Dreams of faded joys and forgotten sorrows, of loves that have passed elsewhere, and of memories that abide. Dreams of faces that are seen no more. Some day it will change ownership. It will be sold to someone from whom understanding of these things has been withheld, and who will see only the darkness of the old corridors, the shabbiness of the old doorway, and he will build new doors and porticos and a wide veranda, and make it fair within and without, levelling the floors and trimming the lawns, and he will have destroyed the old house, and the fragrance of it, and it will never return. But today it still stands as it has stood for many a long year, clothed in the memories that never leave it, and rich in all that the past has built into it. And to some who may never dwell there again, it is ever present as the home of their heart's desire. A true house, a fairy, and fairy here is spelt F-A-E-R-Y. Whoops, turned the page too soon. Sorry. The student had let the old house to the urchin's father. He was a tall, thin man with a hooked nose, and he knew more about one particular family of Coleopatra than anyone living. Coleoptera. Sorry. I was talking about history before. Coleoptera. Butterflies, I think. Than anyone living. He had taken the place not because he wanted it for its shooting, but because one of the beetles of his family was reputed to be plentiful in the neighbourhood. Okay, so it's the study of beetles, not butterflies. He was never there long. He was never anywhere long. For 30 years he had pursued his beetles over 5 continents. His measurements of their wing cases alone filled 9 enormous manuscript volumes. His great work on the variation of the length of the wing case in beetles kept in captivity had become a classic. Another one living from his head alone by the sound of it. Scientific men had nothing but praise for the book. Several even read it. The majority believed that he had refounded neo-Mendelism past any overthrowing. A small but persistent minority argued that, on the contrary, he had utterly overthrown the neo-Mendelians. All, however, agreed that the book was epoch-making, even though they differed utterly as to the sort of epoch which it made. The author himself was a shy and modest person who never lost his temper except when people sent him unpaid parcels from Timbuktu or Kamchatka, containing beetles of other families in which he took no interest. So to find out what was in them, he had to pay for them. On the rare occasions when he could be induced to go into society, kind-hearted hostesses who saw no reason why one crawling thing should not do as well as another had been known to try to please him by starting a conversation about ladybirds or earwigs, and it was said to be worth foregoing one's cigar to hear him explain with a chuckle that although earwigs or ladybirds were no doubt meritorious creatures in their several spheres, and possibly legitimate objects of study to others, they were not his subject. His subject was a particular family of Coleoptera. He and the student had become great friends, and when he was in the island he would often drop in to see the student's book room after dinner, and there the two would sit, one on either side of the fire, each smoking at a tremendous pace and talking hard on his own subject. Neither ever expected an answer from the other, neither ever got one. But they had silently established an unwritten law that when one had talked for 3 minutes by the clock on the mantelpiece, he was to stop and let the other have a turn. And when at last they said good night, each felt that they had both had a thoroughly enjoyable evening. And so they had. Unlike to unlike. The urchin's father had married the daughter of a stockbroker who on her death had left him 2 legacies. One was the urchin, and the other was an occasional visitation from her brother Jeconiah, Mr. Jeconiah P. Johnson. The well-known promoter of companies was a short, stout man with a red face and a shifty blue eye, always immaculately dressed in broadcloth, with a huge expanse of white waistcoat over which sprawled his double watch chain and his triple chin. There were possibly some good points even about Jeconiah, if anything so rotund can be said to have points. But there were certainly not many. He was supposed by some to possess what is called a high standard of business morality. It would be truer to say that his code was prehistoric. He had so far kept himself right with the law because he had mastered the sordid maxim which proclaims that honesty is the best policy. No other reason was likely to occur to him. With some effort he had succeeded in formulating a rule of conduct of which he was rather proud. Do good to yourself and your friends, and evil to those who stand in your way. If anyone had told him that the philosophy of ethics took its rise some 22 centuries ago in a reaction against a similar rule, he would have remarked jocosely that he never studied back numbers of anything more exalted than policy, anything not to be reckoned in terms of pounds, shillings, and pence. He was as ignorant as a hippopotamus. He was never very fond of his right hand's knowing what his left hand did, for while the right hand promoted companies, the left hand, by means of a manager and a registered alias, carried on a very useful little money lender's business. He was never averse to putting the screw on, if there was anything to be got by it, and sometimes he got rather funny things. Recently he had had a broken debtor on his hands, and had taken what he could get, among other things an old bureau full of papers. Jeconiah, being a methodical soul, had turned a clerk on to sort the papers, and the clerk had presently brought him the long-lost map of the Scargill Cave, and a sheet of paper containing somebody's rough explanation of what it was supposed to be. Jeconiah, who had heard the story, scented possibilities, and, it being a slack time in the city, promptly invited himself to his brother-in-law's house to recover from an attack of the influenza. That is how Jeconiah comes into this story. It could not be helped, for he had the map. The finner had said he was too fat to count, but that is where the finner was wrong. The finner was the orca, probably. Killer whale. Jeconiah forthwith gave his mind, such as it was, to the subject of caves. Diffidence was not his failing, and he cross-examined every person he could find, concealing, of course, his real object. He collected a splendid amount of rubbish, but he was acute enough where his pocket was concerned, and out of the rubbish he presently dragged forth the fact of the haunted cave which no one would enter. Whereupon Jeconiah went over to Scargill to fish and had a look at the lie of the island, settled himself that it seemed a good enough place for a wreck, and told the keeper to row him into the west cave. But the keeper, who had no particular liking for Jeconiah, refused point blank, and told him he would not find a man in the island who would do it. And Jeconiah, who had suddenly lost interest in the fishing, went home in a bad temper. This happened the day after the two children were in the cave, and the day after that the urchin's father received an excited cablegram from Brazil on the subject of his beloved beetles. He rushed down at once to see the student. "I'm going to Brazil. I don't know for how long," he said, "and my boy can't go back to school for a month or more, as they have scarlet fever in the village there, and I don't like to leave him with the housekeeper, and I start in 2 hours. Will you take him?" "I'm delighted," said the student. "Fiona will look after him." So the urchin came, and with him came to Fiona a sense of responsibility for him. She couldn't help it, but Jeconiah showed no intention of moving. On the contrary, the after-effects of influenza were still troubling him sorely, it seemed. At last the urchin's father had to tell him to stay a week or two longer if he wanted to. The servants would be there anyhow, and Jeconiah thanked him and settled down to stay, as he had meant to do all along. But as soon as his brother-in-law was gone, he took the car and went out for the day. The chauffeur said that he went to a lot of places and talked to a lot of people, and a couple of days later 2 strange men in a boat entered the bay and proceeded to camp out on a part of the shore which was not the student's property. Jeconiah had, in fact, hired the boat and found a couple of ne'er-do-wells from the mainland who knew nothing of him and were ready to row him anywhere in pursuit of his business, which was understood to be photographing wild birds for an illustrated paper. Yeah, right. Jeconiah had, however, made one great mistake. He was aware that you must not neglect little things, and he had neglected quite a big little thing, the urchin. He had never spoken to him about caves, or taken the least notice of the boy's movements, and the urchin, on his side, had been hard at work. He had confessed to Fiona on the subject of the footsteps, and she to him, and they had agreed, under the broad healthy light of day, that probably they had been mistaken and afraid of the dark, and that with lanterns it would be all right. They agreed, however, that it was necessary to have a really good light, and the difficulty was to find one. It was the urchin who came forward as the saviour of society by proposing to win over Jones, the chauffeur, and get the loan of one of the big acetylene headlamps from the car. Jones, a newcomer, had not yet heard about the cave, and being English he had not yet found his feet among his fellows, and was glad of any sort of diversion. The urchin wound up a triumphant half hour of diplomacy by making Jones promise to lend him one of the headlights and show him how to work it. Then the urchin fell as many greater men have fallen. He was lifted up with pride and told Jones that Fiona and he were going treasure hunting. Jones grinned, but that evening he talked, and in due course Jeconiah heard. Just a moment. Trying to get a box to put something on my desk. Let's see if this is going to work. Ha! Sort of. But I'm not going to leave it there. I have a lava lamp. And it's not yet hot enough to be doing anything, but soon. One day I'll get it set up so it can be in the corner of the camera, like over here. Oh, look, it's doing something. There's a little bit of wax going up. And I'll have it set up so it can just be blooping away in the background. That'll be fun, won't it? But this is not my chapter break, so that's why I'm not talking. And by the way, hi foregathers. Nice to have you here. Right, we shall carry on. Here we go. Fiona was digging in her garden, or rather in the urchins, for she had assigned him one bit of it, which she had to cultivate for him, otherwise it would have run to waste. Doesn't sound like he was interested in gardening, for all the work the urchin put into it. Her garden was one corner of the old walled garden of the student's house, which was not very well kept now. I'm also trying to reach the charge cable for my iPad so that it keeps working. And I'm using the charge cable, not the data cable, because the data cable means that my computer is not happy and tries to think about it. Yes, that's the right one. And it's charging, but it's not doing any talking. That's good. Here we go. Her garden was one corner of the old walled garden of the student's house, which was not very well kept now. Once it had been gay with flowers and rich with fruit, but now few flowers grew there, save such as could look after themselves, and the fruit had come down to 2 gnarled old apple trees, in which Fiona had made her earliest experiments in climbing. Most of the ground, so far as it was in use, was now given over to cabbages and potatoes. A good, solid food, available for the times of the year when you want some, and probably not quite so intense to look after, and they last a long time. But in June the borders were sweet with double white narcissus, and now in September there was a revel of unpruned roses, their blooms growing smaller year by year, and a mass of the dark red blossoms of the little west coast fuchsia, which knows how to live through the winter. Unpruned roses, yes, if you leave them long enough, each year the flowers are slightly smaller, if they're ones that normally would, well looked after, have big flowers. One deserted corner was gay with Turk's turban, which still had strength to push up through the ever-thickening tangle of weeds. That's another thing you can write down and look up later. Turk's turban. It's an old-fashioned name for a particular flower. Which one? Well, if you look it up, you could possibly post a picture in our Discord server so that we all know what it's like, or a Wikipedia link if you find the right one. Through the ever-thickening tangle of weeds, and groups of winter crocus were coming up in the borders, and among them a few Shirley poppies, which Fiona had sown herself. Fiona had had thoughts of taking the garden in hand, but the space enclosed by the old walls was far too large for her to manage unaided, and as there was no money to pay a proper gardener, she had had to content herself with clearing one corner. Here she had achieved a riot of colour. She had made a little rockery of oak leaf and beech ferns brought down from the hill, sentinelled by tall pink foxgloves. The worn-out plum trees against the wall behind were threaded and festooned with thick trailers of yellow and scarlet nasturtium, and in front of the rockery, her especial pride, was a great bed of velvet pansies, rich with every hue of the rainbow. They were flanked by simple annuals, filmy pink poppies, orange eschscholtzias, and sweet-scented mignonette. And in a bed by themselves were the gold and crimson snapdragons, which the urchin had begged for her from the gardener at the big house. I'm rather tempted to see if I can actually put together a flower garden that looks something like this, a little bit rough, a little bit jumbly, but with such bright colours. She must needs dig up a centipede, one of the small yellow ones. They were her special dislike. The centipede did not like being dug up either, and writhed himself into 7 different sets of tangles at once, as is the way of smaller centipedes. "You horrid little yellow beast," she said, forgetting that he could understand, and made a dab at him with her spade, which, to her relief, missed him. She felt she had done her duty by hitting at him, but did not hide from herself that she had really missed him on purpose. "Little's all right," said the centipede, "and yellow's all right, and though I'm not really a beast, we will let go of that. But I'm not a bit horrid." "But I don't like you," said Fiona, "and you wriggle so." "In the circles in which I move," said the centipede, "my wriggling is much admired, and the mere fact that you do not like me, which I may remind you is only a subjective impression and has neither objective validity nor permanent value, does not entitle you to call me names. You ought to have learned better with that bangle of yours. For all you know, I may be a model of the more unselfish virtues." Remember, she's found out that the bangle that she's wearing is prehistoric and helps her to be able to understand the voices of different creatures. "But you eat the roots of my flowers," said Fiona. "That's the first I've heard of it," said the centipede, "but one lives and learns. It need not be the same one, though, who does both. So in the present case I propose that I should live and you should learn." "I wasn't going to kill you, really," said Fiona. The centipede bowed. "A little courtesy does oil the creaking machinery of life, doesn't it?" he said. "Please lift me up, for I have something to tell you, and your head is so far away. Shouting at you hurts my throat." Fiona stooped down and took up the little yellow creature in her hands. "Congratulations," said the centipede. "We are getting on. You wanted badly to shudder, and you didn't. We shall make something of you yet. My old friend the bookworm, who lives in your father's library, by the way, has recently supplied me with a new quotation from the great poet Virgil, who had once, you may remember, quite a reputation as a magician. It was to the effect that if you couldn't get what you wanted by beginning at the top, you should start again at the bottom. I am the bottom. I am not the very bottom, but I am near enough to it for your purpose. Now you see what you have gained by not killing me." "I don't see anything yet, I'm afraid," said Fiona. "One must have patience with weaker vessels," said the centipede, "so I will explain. My friend the bookworm, who supplies me with my quotations, has a cousin of the same profession in the library at the big house. It was through him that I got the story I am going to tell you about the fat man." "Mr. Johnson!" exclaimed Fiona. "He has nothing to do with me." She disliked Jeconiah heartily, so far as she had given any thought to him. "Oh, yes, he has," said the centipede. "This is where I come in. My bookworm's cousin, who is a great linguist and understands English perfectly, was at work in the library the other evening, and the fat man was having his coffee there. After coffee he lit a cigar and began to walk up and down, and presently he started talking to himself out loud, as my informant says he often does when he is excited. And by piecing his talk together, my informant made out that he had the map of the Scargill Cave, which one of your ancestors once gambled away, and that somehow or other he had found out that the cave of the map was the Scargill Cave, and that he was only waiting for a smooth day to go and locate the treasure." "Well?" said Fiona. "Oh, come now," said the centipede. "It's no use pretending. We all know that you are treasure hunting. Remember, we can all understand everything you say, whether we are linguists or not. And my advice to you is to be quick about it before the fat man can get his oar in." Getting someone's oar in is interfering. "Thank you so much," said Fiona, "and I am so sorry I began by being rude. Tell me, why have you told me all this when I began by being rude?" "Because I am a model of the more unselfish virtues, of course," said the centipede with a suppressed chuckle. "As a fact, I had an earth phone from headquarters, but we are all backing you, you know. And now will you put me down, please? The upper air is chilly." He wriggled into a crack in the ground and was gone. That evening Fiona and the urchin made their final preparations in case the morrow should fall calm. That evening also, Jeconiah heard that he had rivals in the field. His language as he walked up and down the library would have been very bad for the bookworm's morals had that intelligent insect been able to understand it all. But the bookworm's English, though good, was literary, and much of the modern idiom employed by Jeconiah slid off its back. Jeconiah's plan had been to make sure that the gold was there and then charter a launch from Glasgow and take it straight away to the railway head. He saw now that he could not afford the time, and that unless he could deal with the children in some way, he might have to take the gold off in his boat, which would entail some risk, as well as cost him a heavy sum to buy his 2 boatmen. That means to keep them silent. Also, he made up his mind that he must go the next morning, whatever the weather, if it were possible to launch the boat. He knew that the children with their little skiff could only go to sea on calm days. Unfortunately for Jeconiah, the night fell calm, and though he rose early, he had no notion of starting without a good breakfast. By the time his boat was launched and he himself aboard, he had the pleasure of seeing, through his glasses, the children's boat off the east or nearer end of Scargill. The wealth of adjectives which he employed in the circumstances filled his 2 loafers with awe and admiration. Fiona, having the urchin securely under her roof, had breakfasted before dawn, and as soon as it was light enough, the children launched their little boat. The urchin had the precious headlight, ready charged, tied up in an old sack, which would also serve to bring away the plunder, and round his waist he had twisted a length of cast-off rope. Its use was not apparent, but he thought it looked businesslike. They saw that Jeconiah's boat was still drawn up ashore, and in good heart they started on their long pull, because they had to row. They had reached the island before Jeconiah had his boat out. Having no glasses, they could not see if it was being launched or not, but off the eastern end of the island, which is low and grassy, they had a fright, for an empty boat was drawn ashore there. However, when they rowed close in to look at it, Fiona recognised it. "It's Angus McEakin's boat," she said. "He has come to see after the sheep he has on the island. There he is, I can see him. He has got a sheep that has hurt its foot," and indeed they could see Angus tending a sick sheep. "Fiona," said the boy, "we are too silly for anything. Of course the footsteps we heard in the cave were Angus's. There is another way in somewhere, and he would be looking for a sheep." Fiona said nothing. As they neared the cave, the problem of the footsteps kept intruding itself more and more vividly upon her, but the urchin was happy in his theory, and she did not think it necessary to remind him that the footsteps could not possibly have been those of Angus, who walked with a limp. She began to feel a vague sense of disquiet, which she tried in vain to put aside. They entered the cave, and the urchin, with much pride, lit his great lamp. The powerful burner threw a wonderful circle of light onto the black water and black walls, making them glow and sparkle with a soft radiance, till they looked like the very gateway to fairyland. Outside the circle everything became black as pitch. They paddled quietly up the bright waterway and grounded on the stones at the end. The urchin was hot after his long row, and helping to draw the boat up on the stones did not make him any cooler. He took off his jacket and pitched it onto a thwart. That's a seat in the boat. "Yes, it is hot and stuffy," said Fiona. She recollected some story she had read about a coal mine and sniffed. "I hope there is no gas here." The urchin grinned. "Oh, you girls," he said, "who ever heard of gas in a sea cave? What you are smelling is the lamp." Fiona took the lamp up. "I'm going to take charge of this myself," she said. "You can carry the treasure." Sorry, I'm looking at my lamp. It's squirted up a line of wax, and now it's gone and settled, and it's not doing anything because it's not getting very hot at the moment. It's meant to. Oh well. The urchin picked up the sack and threw it over his shoulder. "Go ahead, lady with the lamp," he said, and grinned again. He felt very adventurous. He would rather have liked to be photographed. With considerable caution, necessitated by the heavy lamp, they climbed the rock barrier and descended into the darkness of the inner cave. The walking was better here. The rounded, slippery boulders had given place to a floor of pebbles and sand. Quite a short way from the barrier, the wall of the cave curved away in a semicircle on the right, its smooth surface forming a kind of small recess. Fiona swept the recess with her lamp, and on the sandy floor something gleamed back. The urchin pounced on it and picked it up. It was a gold coin, not the least like any which the children had ever seen. It was, in fact, a doubloon. "This must be one of them," said the boy exultantly as he pocketed it. "One that got dropped. Come on, it can't be much further." But Fiona held the lamp steady and stared at the sand. "Look at the marks on the sand," she said. "They are like the marks of heavy boxes. The treasure has been here, urchin, and it's not here now. Someone has been here and taken it and dropped one piece." "I don't think so," said the urchin. "We shall find them a bit further on." So they went on, but not very far, for the light of the lamp suddenly fell on a rock wall before them, the end of the cave, and it had ended, not as other caves do, by the roof growing lower and lower till it meets the floor. It had ended in this huge chamber of high, rocky walls. "So this is the cave that no one has ever reached the end of," said Fiona. "Why, it goes no distance at all." They retraced their steps to the recess, and then back to the end again, looking on this side and that, and on that for openings, but it seemed quite clear that there were none. "The boxes must have been carried off by sea," said Fiona, but the urchin had an idea. "No one would try to carry great heavy boxes over the rock barrier. They'd just take the gold out in sacks." "The barrier may be a rock fall," said Fiona. "The treasure may have been cleared out, may all have been cleared out long ago." Sorry, I'm just shaking my lava lamp, trying to get it to go again. It was working really well yesterday. I was hoping it was going to work today. "The barrier may be a rock fall," said Fiona. "The treasure may all have been cleared out long ago." And then there came to the urchin the realization of the fact that he had lost his gun. He turned very red. "It's a shame," he said angrily, "an awful shame. It was given to me, and someone has taken it. Can't you think where it could be, Fiona? I'd go anywhere to find it." Whatever Fiona may have been going to say, her words trailed off into sudden silence, for from beyond the cave wall, as it seemed, sounded again the footsteps which they had heard before, and this time they knew that there was no cave there, and that it was walking through solid rock as if along a road. There was no question this time of any concealment or pretence. Both frankly turned tail and made for the rock barrier. Halfway there the urchin tripped and fell heavily on his head. Fiona put the lamp down and helped him up, dizzy and shaking. "Can you go on, urchin?" she said. "If not, I'll try and carry you." The urchin looked back into the blackness, unrelieved by any ray of the lamp, which faced the other way. The footsteps were steadily drawing nearer, neither hasting nor staying. What the urchin may have thought he saw, Fiona could not guess. He gave one shriek, slid out of her grasp, and bolted for the rock barrier as fast as his trembling feet would carry him. For one moment Fiona all but followed him. Then it suddenly came to her that she was responsible for the boy's safety. She never knew afterwards how she managed to do what she did, but she turned, and with the courage of utter desperation, the courage which enables the hen partridge to face the sparrow hawk, stood at bay, swinging up the heavy lamp to see and face whatever should come. And into the circle of lamplight quietly walked the figure of the old hawker. The revulsion of feeling was too much for Fiona. She sprang forward and caught the old man's hand and clung to it. "Oh," she said, "I'm so glad it's you. I heard the footsteps and we were so frightened." The The relief of it all was overwhelming. She was almost crying, and went on saying anything, hardly knowing what she said, just for the mere human companionableness of it. "How did you come here? I suppose you came over with Angus in his boat. Of course you would. Then there must be another way into the cave after all, and we couldn't find it." "And so I frightened you?" said the old man gently, making no effort to withdraw his hand. "Yes, there is another way in." He made no attempt to answer all her questions. "Urchin!" called Fiona, raising her voice. "Urchin, come back, it's all right." But there was no answer. "Urchin!" she shouted. "Urchin!" But there was no answer save the echoing of the empty cave. "He was going down to the boat," she said loyally, repressing the fact that the urchin had bolted. "We must go after him, for he had hurt his head, and I'm afraid of his falling again." They climbed the rock barrier and made their way to the boat. The boat lay there as it had been left, half ashore, with the swell rippling against the stern, and over one thwart the urchin's jacket, just as he had thrown it down. And the boat was as empty as the cave. "He must have fallen again and be lying somewhere," she said, with fear in her eyes. They went back, searching every nook and corner of the cave, turning the light into every crevice, under every rock, making a minute examination of the rock barrier, and there was no sign. And then Fiona broke down. "He is drowned," she said, and just sat and sobbed. After a few moments the old man came and sat down beside her. In his gentle voice he said that the urchin could not possibly be drowned. The water was quite shallow at the edge, and he was a good swimmer, was he not? And even if he had not been, the swell would have rolled him ashore. He himself had no doubt that all would come right. Fiona ceased sobbing and turned on him. "Do you know where he is?" she demanded bluntly. "How would I know when you do not know?" said the old man. "Could I see what you could not see? And then, listen." Down the waterway came voices and the sound of oars. It was in fact Jeconiah's boat entering the cave. Fiona caught at the straw. "He may have swum out to the other boat," she said. But there was no one in the other boat but Jeconiah and his 2 men. They had powerful lanterns, and the boat was full of sacks. Jeconiah himself was purple with suppressed rage and impatience. The moment he could get ashore, he waddled up to Fiona and shook the map of the cave in her face, exclaiming, "Remember, if you have found anything, it belongs to me, and I claim it." Fiona had only one thought in her mind at that moment, and the foolish impertinence of the little fat man was to her merely so much unnecessary sound. Her answer was, "Have you seen the urchin? We have lost him. Did he not swim out to your boat?" She was almost sobbing again. "Confound the brat," said Jeconiah roughly. "I've not come here to play hide-and-seek with a parcel of children. Tell me at once what you've found." Fiona straightened herself and looked at Jeconiah as though he were some noxious reptile. "There was nothing here to find," she said, "and this cave belongs to my father, and anything in it he gave to the urchin." "Well, he's not here," said Jeconiah brutally, "and I am. Who finds keeps." And calling to his men to bring the lights, he set off, between stumbling and crawling, for the rock barrier. One of the men had the decency to stop a moment and tell Fiona that they had seen nothing of any boy. Jeconiah turned and abused him for a laggard. That means someone who's slacking and slow behind. With a good deal of difficulty, the 2 men hoisted and shoved Jeconiah over the rock barrier. Once over, he took a light himself, told the men to wait where they were, and after a good look at the map, set out for the recess where the urchin had found the doubloon. Fiona followed him. There was some vague idea in her mind of protecting the urchin's property. Behind that there was still a faint subconscious hope that in some way or another the urchin would suddenly reappear and laugh at her terrors. Jeconiah reached the recess. He saw and understood the marks of the boxes on the sand. He swung round to Fiona with a snarl like that of a hungry wolf. "You think you're clever, don't you? You and your father. I suppose you've had the stuff moved, but I'll have it if I go to the middle of the earth for it." It was the old hawker who shouted. He had stood apart, a silent spectator of the scene, and at this moment he called out in a voice of surprising power for so frail a body, "Look out above you! Jump!" Fiona, who had learned to obey, jumped back just in time. But Jeconiah had never learnt to obey any orders but his own. He stood stupidly staring as a bit of the roof of the cave bowed downward, gave way, and came cascading about him in a shower of earth and big stones that filled the air with thick dust. When the dust cleared again, they saw Jeconiah lying on his back in the middle of the cliff fall, motionless and to all appearance dead. But Fiona was not looking at Jeconiah. She was looking at the place where the roof of the cave had bowed itself before falling, and into her mind came crowding dim, forgotten legends of fear and hope, and she was saying over and over again to herself, as though she might miss its purport, its purpose, what it implied, that behind the cliff fall, as if impelling and directing it, she had seen a small, brown, elfin hand. It was the old hawker who took charge of the situation. The two men, who at first had looked as if they would run, became amenable when he spoke to them. They carried Jeconiah's body to his boat and laid it in the stern sheets. That's in the seat across the back. One of the men pointed out that there was no mark at all on his face or head, and that he did not believe he had been struck. "Died of fright, I expect," he said curtly. "Luckily we stood out for wages in advance," said his companion. It looked as if this might be Jeconiah's fitting epitaph. That's what you write on someone's grave, is their epitaph. The old man himself went with Fiona in her boat, but he was too feeble to row far, so he landed on the island and went in search of Angus. In due course, Angus came down and rowed Fiona home, saying that the old man was going to look after his sheep for him till he returned. It did not occur to Fiona until they had gone too far to turn back that it looked as though the old man wished to avoid questions. Her mind was in a helpless whirl in which everything seemed unreal, except the urchin and that small brown hand. She could not give her father any very coherent account of what had happened, but he went out at once to find a boat and men to search the cave. Jeconiah was laid on his bed in the big house, and there was much commotion there. This one must go for the doctor, and that one for the student. Scared maids stood and whispered in the corridors. The two loafers, heroes of the hour, feasted happily in the kitchen. Then the doctor came and went upstairs with a grave face, as befitted the occasion. But he did not come down again, and surmise grew. Half an hour passed before the door opened, and the doctor, smiling and rubbing his hands together, came into the library, where the student had just entered, and was talking to the housekeeper. "He's not dead at all," said the doctor. "It's catalepsy, suspended animation, you know, like the frog in the marble. Had a shock, you tell me? Just so, just so. How long? Oh, he may be an hour and he may be a month. No one can ever say. Never had the good luck to see a case before. Not very uncommon, no. Mustn't try to rouse him, you know. Might be dangerous. Just wait. Send for me at once if he comes to. Can you get 2 nurses to watch him? If you like. Can get 2 nurses to watch him, if you like. Just as well, perhaps. Sometimes they are odd when they wake. Think there's someone else for a bit, you know. Change their habits and so on. Dual personality. Oh, yes, several well-attested cases, but I don't mean as much as that. Might arise this way, of course, but what I mean is more just queer. But of course he need not be. He might wake up as if he'd been asleep. If it lasts long, to take away all the almanacs and things in case he gets a shock. Anything with the date on it. Well, good day, good day. And the doctor went. And Jeconiah's body lay still on the bed, waiting till his soul, if he had one, should return to it. So the student went home again, and on his way he met the old hawker, who stopped and spoke to him, and for a few moments the two walked together, the old man talking rather quickly. Fiona, watching from the window of the book room, could see that her father first looked puzzled, and then grave, and then considerably relieved. In a dim kind of way, she found herself thinking that Angus must have rowed back very fast to Scargill if the old hawker were already landed. That's what I was wondering. She was wondering who he really was and why her father was talking to him. "Tell Anne to get us something to eat. Anything," said the student. "The boat will be here directly." The student, by straining what remained of old loyalty as far as he dared, had found 6 volunteers, good men, to face the haunted cave, provided he went himself. "Do you want to come, Fiona?" he said. Of course Fiona meant to come. And while they waited, the student questioned Fiona and had the whole story coherently, except the hand. That part Fiona felt she could not tell. There in the cheerful bookroom it seemed so impossible. Once or twice he nodded and said that would be so, and at the end he pointed out that whatever had happened when her back was turned, as she had faced the coming footsteps. She had not thought of that. What puzzled her and hurt her a little was that, though her father seemed to feel for her, he did not appear to be particularly concerned about the urchin. "I believe it will come right," was all he said. I wonder what the old man told him. The boat arrived, rowed by strong hands. The men worked with a will, and the distance to the cave seemed short. They had brought good lights, and the student had a powerful electric torch. High and low they searched the cave, and found nothing. One man, who was a good swimmer, dived several times and found nothing there either. Tracking footsteps was impossible. The sand, where there was any, had been hopelessly trampled. There was nothing more could be done. The student said that he wanted to look for a thing himself, which he had an idea of. He went down to the end of the cave with his torch and tapped the wall with a geological hammer. Fiona sat on the rock barrier and watched him. What he was seeking, she had no idea. He came slowly back down the cave, tapping the wall, till he reached the recess where the urchin had picked up the doubloon. He went straight to the back of the recess and tapped the wall there, and even as he did so a large piece of stone fell from above and smashed the electric torch in his hand. He came back to the rock barrier quite unperturbed, looking as if he had found what he sought. "Not very safe, this cave," he said calmly, and told the men to push off the boat. "There's nothing more we can do," he said. "The boy is certainly not here." The men's courage was fast ebbing away. They were glad to get out of the haunted place. Fiona sat in silence all the way home. It was dark before they reached the house. She waited while Anne bustled over supper. She thought she would never see her father alone. At last supper was over, and he went into the bookroom and began to light his pipe. She followed him. Her words came out in a torrent. "Daddy," she said, "what does it all mean, and why are you so strange and unconcerned? What did that old man tell you? If I couldn't see, he must have seen, for he was facing. What is it you know, and why have you told me nothing?" "Sit down, little daughter," said the student. He drew her beside his knee, and with her head on his arm. "I will tell you now what I can. The old man gave me a sort of hint. He did not really see, for the lamp was the other way. I fancy he guessed. I wanted to test what he said to me. I have tested it now with my hammer. It all agrees. I am absolutely certain that no harm has come to the urchin, but I can do nothing for him myself, and I must not even tell you what I think, for if I do, it ruins everything. All I may tell you is this, that you are the only person who can do anything. You will have to do it all yourself and by yourself, little daughter. I believe you have ways and means of your own of finding out. Are you going through with it, Fiona?" "Of course I am, Daddy," she said. "How can I do anything else? If only I knew what it is I have to do to find him. How to begin even." "I cannot even tell you that," said the student. But his fingers played with the copper bangle on her wrist, and out of some dim corner of subconsciousness she seemed to hear a small voice which said, "If you can't get what you want by beginning at the top, you must start again at the bottom." Her father, with his learning, was the top. The bottom? Fiona went to bed less miserable than she had expected. And that's the end of that chapter. And that took 3/4 of an hour to read. Wow, that was a lot. The next chapter is not as long, and I shall read it, but first I need to have a drink of water because my mouth's rather dry. And finally, yay, look, 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 it's working. It's working. It took a while longer than I expected to melt. I'm just going to have a quick look here and see if I can swap pictures of books on my overlay, and then you can see what the current book is that we're reading, what the cover of it looks like. Oh, goodness me. That doesn't look right. You don't have any overlays. That's not true. Stream Elements, what have you been doing? How peculiar. I'm just reloading that page. That's odd. Because I am logged in. No, hang on a minute. I'm not logged in with the right account. That's really strange. No, here it is. I have got it. I am logged in with the right account. And it says I'm live, so that's correct. And I'm going to scroll through. Reading intermission, that's this one. It's under my favourite overlays. It just needed me to reload the page, didn't it? It's the way with a lot of things on the computer, either reload it or reboot it, and hopefully I don't have to reboot this. Are you going to do something? I want to edit that. Yep, it's working. They've totally changed the what it looks like and the arrangement of different pages for Stream Elements on the website when you're logged in. Totally different style. It's got the same menu down the side, but initially it's like, that's a bit strange. I don't know where that came from. So that picture there, come on, give me the name of that picture, that one. Settings. I really want to give you this other picture. It's coming. Yeah. So one of the things you can do is to join our Discord server. And if you've, that description of the flowers in the garden, the plants in the garden, you could actually look those ones up. You can, to find out which plants they are, you could have a look at the ebook, which is at gutenberg.org, gutenberg.org. And if you go there to gutenberg.org, you can look for the treasure of the Isle of Mist, which is what's written up there in the overlay. This is if you're watching this on Twitch, obviously. If you're watching it on YouTube, it won't be written there. It'll be written down below as the title of the video, in the title of the video. So you can go there and you can look that up. I'm sure it's here. I had an isolated version of it. Maybe I saved it in here. Not there. You can look it up, and once you've looked it up, you can read through to the chapter that we've just been reading to find the bit that's about the garden, the flowers in the garden. Hurry up and load it. Yep, there it is. It's on a weird background. That's okay, I'll edit that sometime and do another version. You can look up the flowers in that garden and then have a look for them online and see, and maybe even you could edit some of them together into a picture, a whole bunch of them all together in a picture, and then you could actually say, look, this is what some of the things were in her garden. That might be a bit easier than trying to grow them all. I think that might be a bit easier for me anyway. So I am thinking I'll have a go at growing something that looks a little bit like her garden, and if I hit the save button here, you should be able to see. It's not very fancy, it's just a plain red book with gold stamped lettering on the cover. And the overlay's changing, and here it comes, and there's the book. That one up there. It looks boring, sorry. I'll do the isolation and white outline, so sometime. I'm going to change that and get rid of that. I don't need that anymore. And we shall carry on reading. So Discord. Yes, if you join our Discord server. Sorry, I have to take off my socks. It's rather warm here because there's a fire downstairs. I don't really have that library behind me. That's a nice picture from the internet. I would love to have that library behind me, but it's not. Right, so I'm going to put a link for it here, Discord. And I'm also going to put a link here for YouTube, which if you're watching this on YouTube, you don't even need to know about that. But the link for Discord is in my profile on YouTube. So over on YouTube, you can have a look at my other stories. Well, the other stories that I've been reading, they're in playlists, all accessible from that link that I've just got there. And Discord will show you, you can have conversations with other people who've been listening to the stories. Anyway, I shall carry on and read the next chapter, and then we shall finish for today. Oops. Chapter 5, The Treasure of the Isle of Mist by W. Tarn. Chapter 5, The Oread. Oread? I think it's oread. Oread. O-R-E-A-D. Fiona was out long before breakfast next morning, digging furiously in her garden. Not many minutes passed before she was rewarded by a glint of something yellow in a shovel full of earth, and there was the centipede. "You dear creature," she said, and caught it up quickly before it could wriggle away. "How polite we are this morning," said the centipede, swelling with conscious pride. "I suppose we want something." Fiona's mind was far too completely taken up with her one objective to notice or resent any insinuations. "Yes, I do," she said. "You told me that if I could not get what I wanted by beginning at the top, I must start again at the bottom. I can do nothing from the top this time, so I've come to you." "Flattered to be sure," said the centipede. "How frank we are." "Please don't be cross," said Fiona humbly. "I am only doing what you told me to do." "Bless you, child, I am not cross," said the centipede. "I am a philosopher." "Don't philosophers get cross?" asked the girl. "Never," said the centipede. "And when they do, they call it something else. What's the matter with me is that I've sprained my 7th ankle on the bow side, counting from the tail. Don't say you're sorry, for you're not. Anyone can see you're not." "You are horrid today," said Fiona, "and the other day you were so nice." "That's what makes me such a charming companion," said the centipede. "You never know what to expect, so I never pall." "I want to know where the urchin is and how I am to find him," said Fiona. "Is that all?" said the centipede. "Fancy interrupting my breakfast on account of that boy. Well, one question at a time. We'll have the last one first. I'm in that sort of mood today." "How can I find the urchin then, please?" asked Fiona. "Well, you've been told that already," said the centipede. "Haven't you got a memory?" Fiona thought and thought, but could make nothing of it. "My friend the bookworm was there at the time," said the centipede, "and heard the shorelark tell you that the last man went up a hill." "Very well, go up a hill." "But that was for something quite different," said Fiona. "That was for my treasure. I am not thinking of any treasure now." "Silly of you, then," said the centipede. "I would be. Ever studied philosophy?" No, said Fiona. That's a pity, said the centipede. Then you've never heard of Hegel and the unity of opposites. Black and white are only different aspects of the same thing, you know. And as soon as you begin to think about it, you see at once how sensible it is. Well, a treasure hunt and a boy hunt are only different aspects of a hunt, aren't they? Therefore they are the same thing. Therefore, what does for one does for the other. Therefore you go up a hill. There's logic for you. And once more he swelled proudly. Thank you very much, said Fiona. And now will you please tell me where the urchin is? Tell you, exclaimed the centipede. Why, it was you told me. You prophesied the whole thing. I'm sure I don't remember it then, said Fiona. What's the matter with you, said the centipede. What's the matter with you, said the centipede, is that you refuse to exert your intelligence. Such as it is. You should take a lesson by me. You humans are all forgetting nowadays that the spoken word is an instrument of great power, and that once it is launched it goes on, and can work magic on its own account, quite independently of you. If you say a thing will happen, it frequently does happen. But what did I say? Asked Fiona. You told the urchin that if he hurt the shorelark the little people would take him. Well, they've taken him. That is all. And the centipede slid down onto the ground, and with something like a chuckle, vanished. He had evidently learned from his philosophy to bear with resignation the misfortunes of others. But Fiona did not set off up a hill at once. After breakfast she went to the book-room and spoke to her father. I have found out where the urchin is, Daddy, she said. He was carried off by the fairies. The student showed no surprise. You have not been out long finding out, Fiona, he said. I thought you had ways and means of your own. But Daddy, she said, I don't really believe it, you know. It sounds so absurd nowadays. Do you believe it? Believe it? Yes, said the student. I knew yesterday. Now that you know, I may talk to you about it. So far. I don't know that I do really know, she said. Things like that don't really happen, do they? Who ever heard of it? You and I have heard of it, he answered, and that is enough. The proposition that people are not carried off by fairies is a mere working hypothesis, liable to be overthrown by any one case to the contrary. Well, we've got a case to the contrary, and that's the end of the hypothesis. I'm arguing against myself, Daddy, you know, she said. I want to believe that we do know where he is. No difficulty at all, said the student, to anyone with a properly trained mind like yours and mine. Take it this way. No one has ever crossed the South Arabian desert or explored the snow ranges of New Guinea, have they? Well, for all anyone can say to the contrary, people may be carried off by fairies every day of the week in New Guinea or South Arabia, mayn't they? It may even be the rule there. It may be a working hypothesis amongst the pygmies of New Guinea that such a thing always happens, at death, for instance. It would be just as good a working hypothesis as it is that it never happens. But, Daddy, it would be so extraordinary, wouldn't it? Not a bit more extraordinary, he said, than the inside of a bit of radium, or the inside of an egg, for that matter. It's probably simpler for the urchin to become a fairy than for an egg to become a bird, or a caterpillar, a butterfly. It would not be nearly as strange as it is that there is a water beast which can shed its gills and become a land beast, or that Uranus moons go round the wrong way. You can't knock it out by any reasoning of it that kind, Fiona. It's merely a matter of fact, and if we have found a case, we have found a case. Then you knew yesterday, Daddy, she said. I had a very fair idea, he answered. That is why I was tapping in the cave with a hammer. Can you guess why? Fiona saw. To find the rest of the cave, she said. That is where he would be. Just so, said the student. These caves cannot end in a wall, as that one seems to. I thought the wall must ring hollow somewhere, and the hollow is in the recess where the stone nearly fell on me. The apparent end of the cave is not in the line of the true cave at all. It is the same place where the stones fell on Mr. Johnson, said Fiona. That is strange, said the student, and then Fiona told about the hand she had seen. Of course, said the student. That explains the whole thing. They threw the stone down on me too. They did not wish me to know that the wall was hollow just there. They must use it as a doorway. They will have carried the boy through it the moment that you turned your back, of course. I suppose he invited them in some way. They'd have no power otherwise. He said he would go anywhere to find his treasure, said Fiona. That would be quite sufficient for them to act on, said the student. Then the stories about the cruelty of the little people are true, said Fiona. Only in part, said the student. I take it that they are all sorts, like ourselves. They are, as you know, the vanished debris of all the peoples that have helped to make this planet what it is. Good people, many of them, but they cannot altogether love those who have driven them under the ground. And who is the old hawker, Daddy? She asked, and what has he to do with it all? I can't talk about anything except what you already know, said the student. Have you found out yet how to start? I am to go up a hill, said Fiona, and I am going up Helleval now, and I came to see if you would come with me. I wish I could. I wish very much I could, said the student. I do not know what you may find, but I know well that if I went with you, you would find nothing but grass and rock. I am too old to see the things you can see, you know. You have to do it alone, little daughter. So Fiona filled her pocket with bread and cheese and started, and the student, after a useless attempt to settle down to his inscriptions, set up a little 3-inch telescope with which he had sometimes entertained Fiona on fine nights, gazing at Jupiter's moons or Saturn's rings, and followed her across the moor as far as he could. It was the only way he could go with her. There are many worse things in the world than setting out to climb Helleval on a beautiful morning on the 1st of October, when the grass in unsunned corners is still pearly with the frost of the night, and the whole earth is touched with the wonderful caress of the cool autumn sunshine. Fiona's way lay along the shore road past the bank of heather and fern, which in August had been gay with flowers, nappired and potentilla, blue milkwort and starry eyebright, and alive with butterflies, blues, and small heaths and pearl-bordered fritillaries. But the flowers were faded now, and in their place, in the little burn where the hazelnuts grew, was a tapestry of purple burrs and scarlet hips. Those are the seed pods. The shore road ended at a little burn, that's like a little creek or stream. Here an old stone bridge, grown over with grass, crossed the pool, which in times of spate, that's when it's running fast, would hold a fat white sea trout, and here Fiona and the urchin had used to come in summer to gather globe flowers. From this point a sheep track led up the valley beside the burn, through great spaces of yellowing bracken, by little swampy springs where late forget-me-nots still lingered, and an early snipe might rise with a skeep. A snipe is a type of bird, and a skeep is the sound it makes. And across low-lying wastes of bog myrtle, perfuming all the air with its dying leaves. Then the ground began to rise, and fern and bog myrtle gave place to short, hard grass, tufted with bulrushes, and beds of matted, unburnt heather, seamed with rabbit tracks. After a time Fiona left the valley and began to climb the hillside, rising steeply through heather and red grass and heather again, most of it dying by now, but with patches still in full flower, worked by the wild bees and making the moorland smell like a honey pot. Then more grass and limestone ridges, and she stood on the crest of the moor, which billowed away on her right, wave after wave, till it ran down to the low ground and the sea, and rose up on her left, till it ended in the great mass of Helleval, standing up into a cloudless sky. The ground before her was scarred with deep peat hags, their grey banks touched with the tiny scarlet blossoms of the trumpet moss, while from their crumbling sides projected bits of the whitened trunks of trees long since dead, last vestiges of the forests that had clothed the island ere ever the Gael first found his way in. That's the Scotsman. Walking became impossible, and she jumped from grey bank to grey bank occasionally floundering across a little lake of soft peat, where the wild cotton grass still bloomed, and the mountain hares had left telltale tracks. Now and again a hare itself would scurry away before her up one of the peat ditches, rising to the moor level as soon as he thought he was out of gunshot, and sitting up on his haunches to watch. Now and again an old grouse, his head and hackles red as a berry in the sunlight, would rise, crow, and swing away over the brow of the moor, and presently from behind Helleval came drifting a grey bird with a long bill, who on hovering wings wheeled 3 times in the air above her and gave his full spring call, the most wonderful sound that the hills ever hear. Then he swooped close over her head, and with wings spread sickle-wise, shot away for the sea. One may see a curlew on the moor in October, but he will not give his spring call. And Fiona felt of good courage, for she knew that the bird had called for her, to tell her she was in the right way. So she came to the foot of Helleval itself, and started to climb the steep slope of short grass, slippery as polished board, which led up to the rock pinnacle above. The hillside twinkled with the white scuts of rabbits racing up before her to their holes, as round the side of the mountain came their enemy, perhaps the last kite in the island. A kite is a type of, like an eagle or a hawk, a hunting bird. The last kite in the island, glittering in the sun as only a glede can, till the beautifully cowardly creature caught sight of Fiona and swept away across the valley. She passed the great cairn where the hill foxes live, and began the last climb to the pinnacle of rock that fronts the flat crest of the mountain. And now something white on the rock, which she had noticed from below without taking account of, began to become insistent. It could not possibly be a patch of snow yet, she thought. Perhaps the shepherd had hung a sheepskin there, but no sheepskin was ever so white. Then she came up near the pinnacle and saw, standing upright against it, was a girl, not much older than herself. Her long dark hair blew back over the rock. Her white body was half hidden in a trembling veil of white light, which shimmered and played all about her, waving with every breath of wind. Her face was beautiful and cold, like a frosty moonrise, and her eyes shone like the drip of phosphorescent water under the stars. "You have come at last," said the girl. "Every day for many days I have watched for you." "Who are you, you beautiful girl?" asked Fiona. "I am an oread," said the girl. "I am the spirit of Helleval." "I have heard," said Fiona, "that long ago people used to believe that everything had a spirit of its own, mountains and rivers and trees. Is it true, then?" "It was true," said the girl. "The world was full of my sisters once. There were the naiads in the streams, and the hamadryads in the woods, and we the oreads in the mountains. Men were wiser and simpler in those days, but now my sisters are nearly all gone. When a tree has become so many cubic feet of timber, how can it shelter a dryad? When a stream is merely so many units of water power, how can a naiad dwell there? Only the barren mountains, if they contain neither gold nor iron, have been left unappraised and unexploited, and a few oreads still linger here and there. Once in a while a man fancies that he sees one of us. Then he must climb and climb till the day he dies, hoping to see her indeed. Down in your world people call him mountain mad." "How is it then that I have seen you?" asked Fiona. The oread touched her bracelet. "Partly because of this," she said, "but chiefly because you are a child and can still see. What is it you have come to ask me?" "How to find the urchin," said Fiona. "You know, of course, where he is?" the girl asked, and Fiona said yes. "He is in fairyland, but I do not know the way to go." "That is easily told," said the oread. "The king of the woodcock will let you in, and any of his people can tell you where to find him. But do you know the danger? If you do arrive, which is very doubtful, the fairies will make you wish a wish. And if your wish be one that does not find favour with them, they will keep you there forever, till you lose your memory and yourself and become even as one of them." I will take the risk, said Fiona, for I must go and try to bring him back. Why do you want to bring him back? Asked the oread. He is much better where he is. Will he thank you for bringing him back? Not a bit. You will have the labour and the danger, and he will take it all for granted, and then he will become a man, and what use is that? He may be a financier and cheat somebody, or a politician and slander somebody, or a learned man and hinder wisdom. He is much better in fairyland. Why are you going? I can't help it, said Fiona. You can't leave people in the lurch, you know. Of course you can, said the oread. Be sensible and go home. Eat, drink, and be merry. Oh, you don't understand, said Fiona. Don't you see that there are some things you can't do, whatever anybody says? It is not the reason of the thing, it's only just because I am I, and he is lost. You are so beautiful. Haven't you any heart? Neither heart nor soul, said the oread, so I ought to be perfectly happy. You have a heart and a soul, and you are not. Which of us is the better off? I wouldn't change anyhow, said Fiona. The oread laughed. Of course you wouldn't. It is I who would change if I could, but as I have no soul and cannot get one, and do not know what it would mean to get one, it is no use worrying. It is best to be happy as I am. In any case, I would not care to be like men and women. I would not mind having a child's heart like you. I had a heart once, but it is so long ago that I have almost forgotten what it was like. How old do you think I am? You look about 17, said Fiona. I am exactly as old as Helleval, said the girl, and that is more hundreds of thousands of years than you or I could ever count. I am older than any of the fishes or birds or beasts, far older than men or fairies. Look at that, said, and the oread swept her arm over the glorious prospect around her. The two great wings of the Isle of Mist stretched far out into the sea, the Atlantic throbbing and sparkling under the blue sky, and across the loch the jagged grey range of the Cuchulains, peak upon peak. Isn't it all beautiful? We came into being together. Helleval was a giant in those days, a king among other kings, and there was no sea there, and the Cuchulain hills stood right up into the sky and twisted and bubbled while the earth cooled and cracked, and my sisters of the fire came out of the cracks and taught us mountain spirits the fire dance, and we danced it all night on the great peaks till the stars reeled to watch us, and then the fiery summits cooled and sank down, and my sisters of fire sank with them, and a mighty river went foaming out down the valley yonder to a distant sea, and every evening my sisters the naiads came floating up in a circle with garlands of green on their hair, and they taught us mountain spirits the water dance, and we danced it all night on the moonlit water, while the ocean crept nearer and nearer to gaze, and then the sea came up and the river carved Helleval out as you see it, and shrank away, and my sisters the naiads shrank away with it, and the island was covered with great forests, and my sisters the hamadryads came out of the tree trunks and taught us mountain spirits the tree dance, and we danced it all night in the forest glades till one night men saw, and men felled the forests to capture my sisters of the trees and enslave them, but they vanished as the trees vanished, and today only the hills are left. And we, the oreads, a people few and fading away, and we no longer dance, for we have lost all our sisters, and we no longer have hearts. The girl's face had filled with colour as she spoke, and her eyes had become soft, and her voice sounded like the music of waters far away. Fiona looked at her in wonder. Indeed, you have your heart still, she said, and you are far more beautiful even than I thought you were. Come home with me, and I will love you as you have loved your sisters. It is not possible, said the oread. It is not free to me to leave Helleval. I am Helleval, and I shall be here till one day men find iron or copper in my mountain and come up with great engines to carve it and tear its flanks and carry it away, and then I shall go too, as my sisters have gone. Will you die? Asked Fiona. I do not know what death means, said the girl. I shall just go back like a drop of water when it falls into the sea. But do you know what you have done today? For a few moments, because you are brave and loyal, you have given me back my heart, which was lost thousands of years ago. It will all fade away again, but before it fades, will you kiss me?" So Fiona took her in her arms and kissed her, and then turned and went down the hill. Once she faced round and saw the oread standing frosty and white against the pinnacle of rock, holding out her arms, and she started to go back to her, and even as she moved the whiteness vanished, and there was nothing there but the rocky pinnacle shining in the slanting sunlight. Rather sadly, she went home. And that's the end of that chapter and the end of today's reading. And we shall read more next time of The Treasure of the Isle of Mist by W. Tarn. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye.